Let's catch up now with Liberal Senator for New South Wales, Dave Sharma, joining us from the Sydney studio. Good to catch up with you, Dave. You're going to stick with a nuclear plan, aren't you? Because there's no other way to power this country in a net zero world.
Well, I still believe in the merits of nuclear power, Chris, but I think all of our policies, as you'd expect, after a loss like the one we've just suffered, I think, everything will need to be reviewed and reassessed. So, I'm not going to commit to our position going ahead, but I do think that we do need some form of reliable, non-intermittent power in our electricity grid to make sure that electricity remains both reliable and affordable.
Yeah, there's no doubt you're going to adjust policies and certainly have to adjust the way you advocate them. For instance, there's a very clear fact about this election campaign that I don't think I heard anybody on the coalition side argue once, because there's this bipartisan goal to net zero, and Labor has a plan that can't get to net zero, according to all the experts globally. Without nuclear power, you can't get there, whereas the coalition, always portrayed as the climate deniers, with nuclear energy, actually has a plan that can get to net zero eventually.
Well, look, I think that's right. I mean, we took a responsible plan to the election, which committed us to reducing emissions over time, bringing down electricity prices, including through the gas reservation policy, and making sure that the truth is, if you have a grid that relies entirely on renewables, you need to overbuild the grid and the capacity and connection infrastructure and everything else to allow for the vagaries of renewables generation. If you've got non-intermittent sources, whether it's fossil fuel based or whether it's nuclear or gas, then you don't need to overbuild the grid that way. And I think, one of the frustrations, and, we wear the blame for this, but one of the frustrations of the debate was there's a lot of talk about how much would our nuclear plan cost. How much is Labor's renewables-only plan going to cost?
Exactly.
And that figure is in the hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get to the leadership. Andrew Hastie has withdrawn, not surprising really, although you'd think he's got a great future. Why wouldn't the current deputy, Susan Ley, automatically take over?
Well, look, our party rules say that after an election we've obviously lost the leader, so the leadership is automatically vacant. I think that, from what I understand, Susan will be a contender, and I think she'll be a strong contender, but there'll be a number of other candidates in the field too. I don't know for certain who all of those are, but, we'll have a competitive process. It'll be a secret ballot. People will make up their mind. But I think whoever it is, obviously the challenge we have to grapple with is a pretty extraordinary one. This was the worst result for us as a Liberal Party since we were formed, and we've gone backwards in all states. We've gone particularly far backwards in cities, both inner metropolitan and outer metropolitan areas. There's a few green shoots, one of which is it looks like we'll win back at least one Teal seat in Goldstein with Tim Wilson, potentially another Kooyong. It looks like we'll hang on in Bradfield. That's great, but it's set against the backdrop of a pretty cataclysmic election result for us.
Yeah, well, as someone who lost a seat to a Teal, it is good news. To me, it might be the zenith of the Teals is beyond us. As you say, Bradfield and Kooyong, I hadn't mentioned them, looks like the Teals could be seen off there as well. So it's a good turning point. Will you be advocating for anybody publicly in the leadership ballot?
No, I don't think so. I sort of respect that my colleagues all have different views on this, and I don't think advocacy played out publicly is really constructive to the process, because whoever we get as the leader, we will need to work quite collaboratively and have a high degree of trust as a party room, a much diminished party room, to get behind that leader and help them to address a pretty root and branch review of our, everything from the ground up, policies, operations, campaigning, polling, research, the whole works.
Just jumping in though, we can see the narrative. There's so much criticism of the Liberal Party when it comes to the lack of women, and that's coming from outside and from inside the party. If the hardworking deputy, Susan Ley, puts her hand up to get the leadership in this situation and doesn't get it, there'll be all sorts of criticism that this is a repudiation of a leading woman in the party.
I think that analysis is probably correct, Chris. I mean, I don't think, I think we need to vote, though, or people need to support,
Sure.
the leader who can best lead us out of this. And, part of that will be personal attributes, but part of that will also be, how they work with their colleagues, their vision for the party. But I'm conscious that, there is a public-facing or symbolic side to this as well, and people will need to draw conclusions on that.
Mind you, you're between a rock and a hard place. The criticism will come anyway. Even if Susan Ley gets the leadership, they'll all say, "Oh, that's the Liberal Party. They only give the leadership to a woman when they're a busted flush, effectively." So you won't be able to win that one. I do want to go to a senior coalition woman, though. I had on the program last night, Senator Jacinta Nabarjimba-Price. I talked to her about actually maybe joining the Liberals. Have a look.
There's a lot to consider going forward in all of this, and what I do know is that we need to figure out where we went wrong so we don't repeat those mistakes.
You didn't rule out trying to switch to the Liberal party room?
Yeah, look, as I said, there's a lot to consider right now.
Yeah, you don't want to sour relations with the Nationals, but she'd be welcome in the Liberal party room, wouldn't she?
Well, yes, I don't want to be accused of poaching colleagues from the Nationals or anything else. But look, Jacinta is a welcome presence in the joint party room, the coalition party room, and which party room, National or Liberal, she chooses to sit in. That's a matter for her. I'd respect her decision either way.
Great to talk to you, Dave. I appreciate it. Dave Sharma, there, Liberal Senator for New South Wales.